CIS Insider, a premium edition of the Financial Sense News Hour. Today's host is Senior Editor Cris Sheridan.
Mikhail Morin is a data analyst and CEO of Kois Institute. He's also the author of a recently released book called The Definitive Guide to the Age of Automation, which we're going to discuss today. Mikhail, I really enjoyed our last conversation, and I remember we got into some interesting subjects related to artificial intelligence and kind of where things are headed. So we're going to build upon that, especially as it relates to your book, which you just released. And let's start with the first really thing that you dive into, how the current breakthroughs in artificial intelligence fit into the context of prior industrial revolutions. And you talk about the first and second industrial revolution all the way up until the current one that we're in, which is referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. So if you wouldn't mind, give us a high-level overview of where we're at currently in this process.
So to really understand where we're at, we kind of have to look backwards a bit and look through the previous industrial ages, which are periods in history that the development and innovation of new technologies and methodologies vastly increase the efficiency of whatever it's being applied to. So specifically, the first really focused on getting efficiency in manufacturing, early stage manufacturing, assembly lines, et cetera. And then, as we progress, we move toward oil, and then we continue on to today, where we have the age of automation, or whatever nomenclature people want to assign to the current age we're in. And today, what we're seeing is similar to the internet in how things are being completely digitized, but with automation and AI, it's a level of efficiency that we've never seen before. So assembly lines were incredibly great at multiplying force and multiplying labor. You could really produce a lot more in a shorter period of time, but you're still utilizing human labor. And so this trend of, human labor increasing with the innovations is nearly over. And this is a fundamental difference that I say time and time again, is that the age of automation is inherently different from previous industrial ages, in that any new job, any new task, any new profession that is born out of the age of automation will inherently be automatable. And this is something that my fellow contemporaries and other analysts, they don't tend to understand or accept. So when they're doing their forecasts, they're looking at it like previous industrial ages. And in fact, the World Economic Forum put out a study a few months ago. And I'll be honest, I'm not a tremendous fan of the World Economic Forum, but data is data, and I'll take it from anyone. But they put out a study really kind of mitigating what's about to happen in the jobs market. They put out a study, I think they had 97 million new jobs were going to be born out of the age of automation, and only 85 million will be lost. So based on that, and their timeline, I think, was 2025, which is not too long from now. So they're saying there'll be a net positive of about 12 million jobs. So what this study does not take into account is the innovations that will occur in the next 2 years to further drive this exponential curve. And then it also fails to acknowledge that, we're in an AI startup boom where jobs are growing to accommodate all these new startups. But what happens over time is these AI startups will tend to collapse. I think it's 90% of startups fail. I think in the first year, it's about 30%, and in the second year is 40%. So, most of these startups will fail. Many will be purchased by larger companies who will get rid of many of those new jobs anyway. And so what we're really looking at is a net jobs loss of such significance in the next 5, 6, 7 years that I'm not sure how governments are going to handle this economically. So the age of automation increases efficiencies. It allows for new methods of software as a service, digital platforms. It does all these wonderful things, but a lot of people are really missing the mark that any new job that comes from the age of automation will be automatable. And the only reason why a new job might not be automated initially is due to initial costs. And as we know, over time, initial costs diminish rapidly, especially in this day and age. So it's a huge issue that I don't think is getting enough concern. And that's why I wrote this book. This initial book is really just a compendium for my next book. So this book lays out a lot of the architecture that has led to this current industrial age. It talks about the historical referencing of, like you said, the first, second, and third industrial ages, how capitalism is a driving force for automation. And that's interesting too, because we have a free market approach, which it's great. I'm a big fan of capitalism, but what I'm not a fan of is runaway capitalism. That's where companies find new technologies like AI and they leverage them to reckless abandon. And so when they're leveraging these AIs, like we've seen, these massive tech companies are laying off tens of thousands of people. Why are they doing that? Well, partially it's due to the economy, but it's also because they've discovered that it's more cost effective to have a team of 10 do the work of a team of 1,000 leveraging AI.
And then the free market is rewarding that by, their stock prices are jumping as they're laying off all these people because they're able to, it's a force multiplier, right?
It's a force multiplier, and it provides a competitive advantage. So if company A has leveraged 30% of its workforce using AI, company B either has to compete at the same level or innovate upon that. So what happens there is what I've coined as hyper automation. It's a rate of which the free market is left to its own devices in this competitive forum where they continually advance AI and continually leverage it to replace workers. And this is not going to change. This is not some anomaly that will only be present at the beginning of this age of automation. Every indicator shows that this is going to increase, not remain the same, not decrease, but increase. So what does that look like in 5 to 10 years? Well, I'll tell you, it looks a lot different than the World Economic Forum's forecast. So like I had said, we're in an AI boom, and all of these jobs that are being created from AI startups, much like my own. I mean, Cris Institute is an AI startup. We do data analysis leveraging AI, which is a novel use case. And so everybody's finding these niche use cases for AI, but that will only last so long. Eventually, a lot of these companies will collapse. A lot will get bought out. And so these jobs will disappear. And what's left is huge companies being mostly automated. And what does that do for the labor market? Well, we published a study, my company published a study several months ago looking at the data. And we found that just in the administrative, technical, academic areas, we projected a 30% loss of jobs due to automation. And that was based on the U.S. Bureau of Labor of Statistics. I think it was 155 million available jobs by 2026, I think it was. So just a 30% loss in just that, market space is significant. Enough to impact economies at scale. And we're not seeing much done in terms of policy to protect labor. We're seeing policies now being brought out to kind of protect security, but nothing really in terms of labor. And that's kind of why I wrote the book, to prepare people for the next book, in which I kind of discuss my own analysis, my own interpretation of data. But I really wanted to get this book out to provide a conceptualization for people who really didn't understand what's going on. People are kind of confused as to what the function of AI is, how it will affect society.
Yeah, and that's where I really enjoyed the section of your book where you talk about the industrial revolutions, because, I mean, when I think about it, and as you touched upon, I mean, really with the first, second the initial industrial revolutions, it was the augmentation of human muscle power, right? And so we saw a lot of those manufacturing jobs get automated, and that's where most of the disruption had occurred, in the 1800s up until the 1900s. And of course, we saw backlashes to that. But at this point, we've seen the evolution of automation to the point now where it's able to displace or do the tasks of the white collar job, right?
Correct.
And in the past, that was an area that was you couldn't automate. And so there was a big push in response to these prior industrial revolutions to get people into going to college, getting your 4-year degree. And we've seen that, over multiple decades. And that's now reaching a tipping point, because all of a sudden, like you said, we're seeing these AI applications that are able to generate and perform all sorts of different tasks that would typically be performed by someone with a 4-year college degree or even a coding degree.
Yeah. I mean, even a PhD.
Yeah.
We're seeing that too.
Right. I mean, these AIs are now able to, ChatGPT or even a large range of other large language models, they're able to far exceed most humans on a wide battery of tests. So, I mean, it just shows how far we've come. And I want to take this back to what we're seeing in the market currently, because these big tech companies, which their stocks are all exploding, NVIDIA just up, I think 20 or 30%, Google, Meta, they're laying off. I don't know about NVIDIA in particular, but many of these other tech companies are laying off tens of thousands of people in their workforce, and their stock prices are jumping at the same time. And what do we see? Yeah. The people that hold those stocks, which are a very small minority compared to the broad general public, they're being rewarded. But the people that work for them that are getting laid off, I mean, it's really emblematic of some of the difficulties and the dislocations that you touch upon in your book.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I spent several years trying to educate legislators. I did this in my own free time as a consultant. I would call and write legislators to pitch them and present to them this pending crisis that I saw coming down the line. I wasn't the only one who saw this. There were people with much higher celebrity and much more clout who also saw this coming. But needless to say, it just continually fell on deaf ears. No one wanted to listen to it. And now we're reaching a point where this is arguably one of the largest factors that could affect national security. With labor market reductions this dramatic, this quickly, it's inevitable that problems will arise. Where, like you said, we're celebrating this free market approach to how we leverage AI. Instead, we should have developed a tax system. And I'm not big on taxing, but what that would have done, it would have allowed for a mechanism to informally control companies, how quickly they used AI. So, for example, had we developed an infrastructure to tax automation, companies would have been more hesitant and more thoughtful as to how quickly they were automating processes. And this would have at least slowed this down enough that we could prepare for it. But we didn't do that. And so the free market will do as the free market does and compete. And if you're competing, and like I said earlier, one company is using this new technology to vastly increase its profitability. Company B has to do the same thing if they want to remain competitive. So this is happening over and over again in the entire global market. Everybody who can automate is automating, or they should be. If you're not, you're in big trouble. So you need to automate some of your services to just stay afloat. And this is not going to change. This is how we're moving. This is the direction it's going. And it's fundamentally different from earlier industrial ages. And this is where I think people have the hardest time understanding that this new industrial age doesn't care about physical labor. It doesn't create new jobs, unlike what we've heard time and time again. Oh, well, new jobs will arise. That's not true, because in this digital space, in this digital landscape, so say you're a new AI company and you create a new platform that requires a new type of job. Why in the world would you hire somebody who has no formal education on it? Or you'd have to wait 4 years for a new degree structure to be created to squeak somebody into that job when you could just automate the job. And this is going to happen. And in this feedback loop is hyper automation. And so hyper automation is pushing this exponential curve, which directly reflects the reduction of human labor.
I just want to underscore the point that we're seeing this right now, and it is taking place with these big tech companies, right? So this is not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that we're seeing this dramatic step change or breakthrough in these AI applications through generative AI, through ChatGPT, the large language models. This just happened really over the past few years. At the very same time, these big tech companies, which are racing to adopt this technology and implement it, are going through mass layoffs. And their stock prices are jumping at the same time. All of this is connected, right? I mean, these aren't coincidental. Yeah. This is all part of the same process.
Yeah. And I use this example, and I'm sure you've noticed too, but for about a decade or 2 decades, Microsoft was relatively stagnant in terms of innovation. They kind of rested their laurels on their Azure platform, did quite well, Microsoft Buy. But for the most part, they weren't innovative up until the point that they purchased OpenAI. And now all of the sudden, they are producing the most innovative solutions rapidly. And how are they doing this? They're doing this through using unrestricted, hyper-trained models to help leverage their business strategy. And that's what's happening with a lot of these tech companies. I mean, to be honest with you, Chris, that I do that with my AI startup. Why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I be leveraging AI to assist me in strategy and innovation? And so this is occurring faster and faster. And I foresee a time in the not too distant future where most executive level professions will also be automated. Because if you have an executive AI talk to another executive AI of another company, they can determine and go back and forth 1 billion times a second to determine what the most profitable agreement is for each company. And, whoever has the most strong or computationally proficient AI executive will probably yield the better agreement. And so there's no limitation to how these AIs can be rendered to perform different tasks. And, it's hard for me to visualize how things will look in 10 years based on these trends. It's pretty startling, to say the least.
Yeah, and when we're in the midst of exponential change like we see right now, I mean, our minds think linearly. We have a very hard time seeing how things can progress in a complex system at an exponential level, of course. And so, yeah, there is a limitation to just how far into the future we can foresee. And I think that's been the problem, is that, you and a number of others have been trying to warn about some of these processes taking place and what this means in terms of employment and labor. And it's fallen on deaf ears for many years because, again, politicians, those in power, they're not necessarily going to make any proactive decisions based on things that to them are hypothetical, right?
Right.
But
we're reactive, not proactive.
Right. But that's where we're here now. And again, what we're seeing in the tech space, because these big tech companies are the early adopters, they're creating this technology essentially, but they're the first adopters of it, and they are announcing mass layoffs. So if we scale this up outside of tech to the various other sectors in the market and the economy, right, this is going to ripple like a wave out to all of these other areas. It's just we're seeing it first primarily concentrated to tech, but that's the canary in the coal mine, really.
Yes, exactly. So these AIs that are being developed and utilized by big tech will be adopted by other industries, by other markets, because of their usability and viability. So, for example, we'll say Google is utilizing administrative AI. So why wouldn't a mid-sized company in a totally different sector see the feasibility in doing that and lay off most of its administrative or human resources or legal team for that matter? I mean, legal AIs are growing so fast that I fear for the entire legal assistant market. There won't be a need. Why would you need a team of legal workers when an AI can comb through hundreds of thousands of cases, find the correlations that could pertain to the use case scenario, and do that all in a matter of moments? And so every industry is primed for automation. The only thing holding it back is time of implementation and cost. Both of those things diminish over time. That's just a fact. It's just how it works. And so as things become easier to implement at lower costs, you better believe people will be putting it into their pipelines. Like you said, it starts with big tech, and they're the trendsetters. And then it'll very quickly, like a wildfire, spread. And I think we're starting to see that now.
And the irony of all this is their stock prices are jumping in response while, we've now seen hundreds of thousands collectively of people getting laid out in the tech sector. And those people now, if they don't find jobs, they're now having to collect some form of unemployment check from the government. So it's this whole strange dichotomy of where the implementation of AI by these companies means they lay off workers, but now the government has to deal with the expense.
And then you consider, where do those safety nets, how are they financed by governments? Well, they're financed through middle class taxes. But if you have a diminished middle class paying into those pots, that money is going to be smaller while the need for that money is going to increase. And so you have two curves going in two different directions very quickly. And it won't be long before that becomes a significant problem. Yeah.
So again, big tech is really a canary in the coal mine for what we're talking about here in terms of the disruption that this has to the workforce. They are the first movers, but they're also the trendsetters, like you said. And this is going to slowly ripple its way across other sectors in various speeds, right? So there's going to be various rates of adoption on how we see this take place, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in the legal industry, whether or not it's even like if we're talking about some of these applications like Midjourney or other generative applications that can develop music or art. There's all different areas. It's touching almost every aspect of the economy.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at the data analytics market, which is a huge, huge market. I should know this, but I think it's well over 300 billion annually. But again, I'm going to pitch my company again. But so we're working on a solution for comparative analysis, which is really the basis for why anyone pays for data analytics, because you want to derive insights into the future and predictability. And that's why you pay these analytics companies to help you do this. Now, spending many years as a consultant and looking over thousands of different charts and graphs, I can tell you that it's one of the most confusing things ever. And we saw a way that we could simplify this process and automate it and do it in a way that you can rapidly identify correlations between world events and the client's data over time. And what that does is it provides you with a near instant predictability matrix, so you can forecast and strategize based off what you know to come down the line. So my company is not the only company that's doing things like this. What's going to happen to these giant monoliths in the future when all of these specialized AI services are distributed? Either those big analytics companies are going to need to buy out all of these specific use cases where people are leveraging AI, or they're going to collapse because there's easier access to their services. And this isn't just data analytics. This is, like you said, any generative AI service. So Photoshop, for example, they're releasing an AI generative plugin, but what's to stop a small company from doing a Photoshop-like program that does mostly generative AI? Why will people pay for Photoshop subscriptions when they can, have a public free to use solution? And so I'm seeing this now. I have a large language model running locally on my company's workstation. So we experiment a lot with new LLMs and GPTs that come out. And I can tell you, while they're a little bit slower than OpenAI's, actually, if you use OpenAI ChatGPT during a busy hour, it's not going to respond quickly. But these local LLMs that you can run on your own computer, I mean, just fathom that. Like, you don't need terabytes of data capacity or some server at home. Just your regular workstation can run a Chat GPT like clone and do it very well. So with that access to the public, and I think that's why governments are really getting nervous and trying to implement policies to restrict the development of AI. Because let's be honest here, large corporations, let's say multinational corporations and governments, aren't going to adhere to any restrictions. If the net gain of leveraging unrestricted AI is better than the small fee associated, it's considered good business to just eat the fee and violate the terms of the policy. And we've seen this time and time again. And so these policies will inherently hurt the general public and small businesses, as they won't want to go against policy and won't be able to utilize these large language models or generative AI. All the while, these big companies will be using it freely, so will the government. So they're trying to create a gap between industry, government, and then the general public. And I think they're failing, because the general public, like I just said, has access to these local large language models that get updated weekly, and they get better and better and better. And then we're going to get to a point where most people will have access to some sort of Chat GPT like AI on their computer to answer a lot of the questions or conduct some of the services that they would otherwise pay for. For example, why would you hire an attorney when you can have an AI who functions as good, if not better, than an attorney or a realtor? Or all of these things can be done locally with a sufficiently advanced AI. And I think I think there's a lot of talk in government and big industry about how to control this situation, because right now it's really the Wild West, AI.
Yeah, it is. It is. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what you're seeing with the evolution of, ChatGPT, GPT-4? Now we see all these different plugins that people have access to. I mean, I can't even count the number of plugins that are on OpenAI's website. So, I mean, I don't know if there's hundreds or what, but it's almost like, how Apple developed its own ecosystem with all these apps is what we're seeing with OpenAI. And, I mean, a lot of these are AI plugins. So it's just one AI talking to another AI. I mean, it's fascinating.
I don't remember if I brought this up in our last interview, but I've been talking about what I call the coalescence, where this is the point of AIs being chained and networked together. Because for a while, at the beginning of this industrial revolution, AIs were narrow, single use. They didn't really talk to each other. There was no way to chain them together. And then I had anticipated this coalescence factor. So when you're forecasting, for example, the AI market, you look at a period of time in the past, and you look at the present, and you look at that rate of change, and then you try to project forward. But what that doesn't consider are this coalescing factor of AIs leveraging each other. And when they do this, it dramatically increases not only their usability, but the ability to drive that sort of curve.
Positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the feedback loop. This is hyper automation. It's this feedback loop where automated processes generate new automated processes that drive them faster and faster and faster. So when OpenAI released its plugin feature, or even talked about it, I knew that the coalescence factor was finally coming to fruition. And this is a major vector in my long-term assessment. And I thought this was coming down the line in a couple of years. So I'm pretty liberal in my forecasts as compared to my contemporaries. But even I was way off. I was like 2 years too far. So this coalescence is really going to drive automation even faster, because what's going to happen is you're going to have these monolithic networks of AIs that can do anything. So right now, AIs are very narrow. Each one does a specific thing quite well. But when you start chaining them together, you can do pretty much anything. And it brings us closer and closer and closer to an AGI.
Right.
And people can argue about the sentience of an AGI. It doesn't really matter whether it's sapient or sentient. It matters about what it can do. And what it can do is really anything, especially with like Wolfram Alpha being paired with OpenAI's ChatGPT. That allows for statistical modeling, mathematical calculations, and then provides it creates its own understandings of those principles. And over time, these are going to get better. More AIs will be connected, and this will continue, because an AGI won't be created by us. It'll be created 99% by AI. But an AGI, or an artificial general intelligence, is going to change not just the labor market. I mean, we can forget about the labor market as being something to be concerned about. An AGI has a whole other host of concerns associated with it, least of which is just labor.
Right.
But we're moving in that direction really quickly, and I think they're trying to slow that process down.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I want to jump into that because, if we think about it, the current level of artificial intelligence that we see is based on neural networks, right? So deep learning neural networks. That was something that we discussed with you, I believe, in our last interview. These large language models, what they're referred to now, but they are based on machine learning stemming out of these neural networking models, which simulate or emulate the workings of the human brain. Obviously, they're they're technically referred to as artificial neural networks, but they're built off of the same kind of architectural framework of our brain, and that's how they operate. And, when we think about our own human brain, right, we do have all these modules, different parts of our brain that have specialized function, and they all work and cooperate and communicate with each other. And that's kind of what we see with all these different AI plugins and AI applications communicating, like you say, in this synergistic fashion, forming, collective intelligence. And, this is, it appears to be the road towards, like you said, artificial general intelligence. How long before you think that's something that we could see? I mean, are you thinking 5 years, 10 years from now? What do you think is a realistic time frame, if that's even something that can be predicted?
Well, I think it can be predicted, plus or minus a certain percentage of time. But so the coalescing factor was a big one in my projection for an AGI. And I had assumed that this would come down the line several years. I thought maybe in 2 or 3 years. I was wrong. I was very wrong. It's here now. There are different platforms that are doing this already. I would be surprised if we don't see an AGI within 5 years. Now, how do we measure what an AGI is? Well, that's difficult because there's no standardization of what an AGI is.
Right.
I would say an AGI is an AI system that can answer and complete tasks and professions of 95% of the jobs in the world. It will be able to do. I mean, excluding physical jobs. And that's a whole nother, robotics is a whole nother bag. So now, with robot, I don't want to sidetrack too much. So AGI, probably within 5 years. What does that mean? Does that mean some sort of sentient automaton supercomputer that controls the world? Probably not. But does it mean a centralized AI platform that can potentially control the bureaucracies of a government? Probably.
Yeah.
Or yeah, probably. I mean, think about how complex and bloated bureaucracy is. Just here in America, there are departments for departments of sub-departments, none of which share their data. It's a mess.
And again, go back to what we were talking about earlier with big tech being the first movers of this and then shedding, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the process. I mean, what happens when we apply that same optimization principle, if we want to call it that, to government, right? Where you, like you say, you have tons and tons of government workers in the bureaucratic process that I'm sure can be automated.
Oh, they could be automated now. They could have been automated last year, but that doesn't get done, one, to protect whoever is in the White House at the time. They don't want their labor statistics going down. So maintaining government workers is a good thing. While it's a draw on the GDP of the country, it still is. It's a good thing for administrations to be able to show that they have a strong labor force. But eventually that will change. So a lot of these government jobs will be automated, probably by an AGI-like system. And what does that mean? Well, I don't think we have to be too terrified about an AGI, running amok and going Terminator on us. Not yet, at least. Maybe a long time down the future. But what it will mean is a much more efficient method of governing large populations and complex systems of governance, or even the legal system, even the judicial branch. You could have judicial AIs who are impartial and can reference every known legal case and everything, and present a statistical sort of judgment on any court case. And probably it would have like a human oversight to reference that output, because I can't imagine people would want to to have an AI, do their entire case. But, if you have imagine how much money would be saved having an AGI, do that sort of thing. An AGI could do all of these things
Could an AGI run the financial system or
Yes.
monetary policy? Could an AGI end up replacing Jay Powell, the current Fed chair, and many of the board governors?
I hope so. I really hope so, because in fact, I think I wrote an article. I can't remember where it was published a couple of years ago, saying that I believed one of the first use cases of an AGI would be in the financial sector. And why is that? Well, it has ultimate predictability. It will have an understanding of all the nuanced mechanisms in every market. It will be able to look at historical trends and base its analysis off those. So that, it will have a much greater breadth of knowledge and understanding of how markets move. So I do think that an AGI will be leveraged to some degree to monitor the financial markets. I mean, there's already an arms race.
It probably already is.
Yeah, there's already an arms race, and how fast, how far away you are from the exchange in terms of like nanoseconds. It's gotten to the point of ridiculousness. So that to me indicates that the way we trade now is not permanent, not based on current projections. If AI continues to increase like we see it will, given any rate of increase over time, it will eventually have these capabilities. It's inarguable. The only thing people argue about is how long. Some people say 5, 10 years, 15 years. That's really the only argument. No one's saying that this isn't possible. So it is possible. How that will manifest is, I can't foresee that, but I can have thought experiments on it.
One of the things that really got me to take this subject seriously in terms of the impact that artificial intelligence has on society at large was when we started to see high frequency trading really take off in around 2005. It was when it started to make a very big dent. And I think at one point, it accounted for 70 to 80% of all the trading activity that was happening in the stock market. And it's just a dominant feature of the financial markets today. And it's not just in the US, it's also globally. So this technology has been implemented across the board. But the interesting thing about that was, just understanding how this advanced digital signal processing that was really developed in the Cold War for stealth between, Russia and the US in terms of evading stealth or trying to enable stealth to evade radar. A lot of that technology that was developed then was implemented for the stock market and mapping, quote unquote, market space. And then what you would do is you would just exploit every small, tiny little ripple that you would see, in the complex connectivity of all the various assets. And there's a lot of technology. There's even quantum mathematics developed behind it by Jim Simmons at Renaissance Technologies. And, to me, that was really eye-opening to see what was happening there and to understand that people really aren't taking this seriously in terms of just how far-reaching the implications are when this scales up outside of, even just finance. And clearly we see this today. I mean, when you think of just about the amount of enthusiasm that exists right now, not just with AI specifically, but also with the largest companies in the world. I mean, we're talking about Google, Microsoft, Meta, Apple, Amazon, NVIDIA, et cetera, et cetera. These companies now have more power and influence over the world and society at large than I would argue even heads of state, not to mention having trillion-dollar market caps and budgets that are larger than most countries. So that just gives you an idea of kind of where we are today and some of the things obviously we discuss on our podcast when it comes to the tech space. But, a lot of people are characterizing what we're seeing right now as either an AI mania or an AI bubble. How would you characterize this when you think about just the age of automation that we're in today?
I'll start by saying I don't think that AI in itself is a bubble. Perhaps the new AI startup boom might be a bubble, but the technology behind artificial intelligence is not just a whim. It's not something that's just going to dissipate or be trounced by some other technology. So it's here to stay, and it's growing exponentially. the AI boom that we're seeing, what I think will happen is that there'll be a mass consolidation in probably 3 to 5 years of larger companies kind of buying out these startups for their IP. And so those companies will kind of dissolve. So a type of bubble, yes, but not the traditional kind of, housing bubble where everything just blows up. So that's what I think there. Interesting that you kind of point out the state of corporatocracy, I guess is what it's referred to, where these multinationals control large swaths of the global economy. I think for most of civilization and prehistory, governments and royalty were the primary driving force of economy. So you had war, expansionism, logistics, supply lines, infrastructure, culture. They were all controlled by the governing powers of that time. And now today, multinationals have taken that position, multinationals and global banks, actually, and they control economies through industry creation, employment, lobbying, market manipulation, currency control, price fixing. Now we have advanced AI, which I would argue is their most powerful leverage, because allowing for the predictive capabilities that far outmatch anything publicly available, these predictive algorithms or AI represent some of the most sophisticated AI on the planet. I mean, being able to anticipate the future in such a high resolution allows these big players to expand their power and wealth gaps. And it's important for people to realize this is something that I enjoy talking about because it really blows people's minds. I mean, how often have you seen something come up in your feed or your email? And I know your listeners can attest to this, where you see something and you're like, what the heck is my phone listening to me? You're thinking that. And let me tell you right now that would be better off if that were the case, but it isn't. What is happening is that these predictive algorithms have become so effective at gamifying individuals' lives and choices that they now, just like ChatGPT, it predicts the next token in the sentence, the next word, the next phrase, and it does that 90 to 99% efficiently. These types of predictive algorithms will look at your geolocation data on your phone. So you just got back from the grocery store. Your credit card data says you purchased groceries. And then you got on your phone and scrolled through Instagram, and then you did something else. So these algorithms can say, okay, this individual has done all these things in this period of time. With this predictive algorithm, we can safely assume that this person might be interested in looking up pillowcases. And you may have never looked up pillowcases, but you might have thought it. And it's not reading your mind, but it's basically understanding in a mathematical sense that there's a high probability that based on those series of events and all of that data, that your next thought may be pillowcases or slippers or, soap or whatever. If you go to Home Depot and you purchase something there and you look up lawnmowers, it may say, oh, well, maybe he's going to do some gardening. So there's a high probability that people will now purchase soil or whatever. And so these predictive algorithms have become so powerful that they're essentially reading the future at higher and higher statistically significant probabilities. And so these multinationals are leveraging this en masse with tremendous compute power. And it allows them to, like I said, gamify economies more so than any government could ever wish to do. And so that's what we're seeing. And I don't think there's never going to go back to governing control of a democratic body. I know we have this visual optical fallacy that governments are in control, but most people know that that's not entirely true. Yeah, they may create legislation and policy, but where do those policies derive? Well, they derive from lobbyists who finance campaign donations. And I'm not trying to point out all the corruption in government and whatnot. I'm just merely stating this is reality. This is how the system works. If you don't agree, that's fine, but it's not reality. This is how it works. And I don't know where we're going to go from here. If these multinationals continue to expand on these AI and predictive models, what's going to happen is that the threshold for predicting your next movement could be pushed out to what are you going to do the next week? And that statistical probability, the likeliness increases as well. So it may be able to gamify. If you don't look at pillowcases, the next thing in line, you have an 87% chance to turn on YouTube. And so it knows these things. And having that knowledge, that predictive knowledge as a company, and any of your listeners who are also entrepreneurs or own companies can attest to how powerful that insight is.
And I think, as we discussed last time, we're in the process of building artificial general intelligence, or superintelligence, as it's sometimes referred to. And I believe that that is the case. I don't think that there is this magic ceiling that we're going to hit. Of course, things do come in waves, as we've seen with the prior industrial revolutions and the current AI revolution, if you want to call it that we're in now. Nothing grows to the sky. So we could see a consolidation, like you said, for 3 to 5 years or thereabouts. But that being said, as we're moving through this process, and it's going to continue in the years ahead, getting smarter and smarter, one of the ways that something you said reminded me of something that I will often tell people when I'm trying to explain this process, and this is using the framework of Daniel Kahneman with his System 1 and System 2 types of thinking. System 1 is the fast, instinctive, and emotional. It's more where all of your subconscious processing takes place. It's where the majority of mental activity is derived and exists. But then System 2 is the more slow, methodical, logical, like, doing a mathematical calculation in your head. And what I tell people is that we're building out essentially a System 1 digitally. It's kind of like a vast digital subconscious where you are using AI, companies are using AI to develop these systems that can track all of these hidden patterns and things that we ourselves may not even be conscious of that we do, that motivates to do one thing or another, and then they're monetizing that. So, I like to think of it when we talk about where is this all headed with AGI and superintelligence, it's kind of like a digital subconscious.
Yeah, I agree. I think people tend to confuse sentience with sapience, and it's easily confused, but there are different aspects of how consciousness or thought works. And I think it's completely practical to think that very soon we'll have a sentient AI. And that doesn't mean that it will have an EQ or emotionally quotient equivalent to a human, but it will be able to interpret emotion based on visual cues and tonality and etc. But feeling emotion is a biochemical interaction that occurs in the brain. So it may not be able to feel it in the way that we understand it, but I think we touched on it last time. Does it really matter? Does it matter that it's not feeling emotion the same way? I mean, look at savants. They don't feel or experience emotions in the same way that a typical human does. And are they not sentient? And the answer is obviously, of course, they're sentient. And so I think people really have to acknowledge what is coming down the line. And it's based on these trends. And this is, I look at trends every single day. I do analysis on them every single day. And every trend is going in this direction. Every digital trend, I should say, is going in this direction of an AGI. And we need to kind of prepare for that. And who controls that? Well, it should be public domain because I have a sincere fear, and I'm pro capitalism. I'm a capitalist. I'm a conscious capitalist. I think everybody should, engage in the free market and build products and services that, assist people and the public, and you can still make money on top of that. What I'm afraid of is this parasitic capitalism where something like AGI will be in a walled garden of either government classification or behind, IP security, where the public will have just a fractional interaction with it while these multinationals just explode in terms of their wealth gaps. And that's not good. That's parasitic capitalism. What happens is you're squeezing your consumer base so much that they won't be able to spend. So it's like there's just no foresight in it at all.
You and I are speaking on June 5th, so it's Monday, and Apple is set to release their first VR headset. Meta as well is going to be releasing their own Quest 3, so the third iteration. I think that's going to go from anywhere from like $200 to $500, depending on how many gigabytes you buy. And then we'll find out shortly, of course, but Apple's is supposed to go from the leaks anywhere from like 2,000 to in the thousands. So that's a much higher price headset. But I'm curious, because there was a lot of talk about the metaverse and how this relates to the development of artificial intelligence. That kind of died down for a while, but now again we're kind of seeing this competition heating up again with headsets, and I think we are going to see another wave as the technology gets better there. But where does VR and the headset competition kind of fit into this conversation?
So if we look at the most traded commodity today, it's data, right? Data is the highest valued commodity for a reason. It allows for being able to create these predictive analytics. So data is the most valuable thing. Back in time, it was gold or precious metals. And what did you do to acquire more precious gold or precious metals? You dug bigger holes, right? And you sifted through more dirt. And so I see that as the reason they want to push this metaverse out is because it's a bigger hole in which to acquire data. It's a way to scale up. And what they keep running into, and I think they will again, is the public's disinterest in that sort of environment. I honestly think that the newest push is going to fail. However, what will come out of it is augmented reality. Now that's slightly different. They overlap a little bit, but augmented reality is really what it does is it enhances your ability to perceive the world. So if you have glasses that overlay certain data or statistics or information in your vision, it can dramatically help you in work or personal life if you can just look and it knows the name of the person you're looking at, which for me is very helpful. I made a fool of myself many times. So I think AR is a much more practical application of those types of technology. The metaverse, I just see it as a marketing push by the big tech to really try to dig a bigger hole to collect more data. But I think the public is just really disinterested. Look at 3D movie theaters. I hated that. And I'm a tech guy. I love tech and I love trying to adopt new things, but it didn't take off because people don't like that. They want to know if I'm on a computer, that's my interface to the digital world. They don't want to wear funky goggles and have a safety room so you don't knock stuff over or, how you look, and they're uncomfortable. None of these hurdles have been surmounted yet. So there's still the same problems that existed. I think it was 6 or 7 years ago when they did their first push. None of those hurdles have been met. All they've done is upgraded some of the hardware components and algorithms in them. So I think it'll fail. And maybe I'm wrong. I could be very wrong there, and I could lose out on millions of dollars of potential investments. But I don't think I am wrong. I think the metaverse will fail to grow as they hope. But I think what they'll do is they'll pivot toward more augmented reality services. So in cars, overlays in the front windshield or glasses that you can wear.
Yeah, and actually, just as we're speaking, the news was released that Apple did announce their Vision Pro XR headset. So X
Yeah.
standing for extended reality. So XR, which encompasses virtual reality and augmented reality.
Right.
One point that is really interesting, because if we are building AGI and superintelligence here, like we're discussing, then if you are using eye tracking, if you're using a VR, AR device, headset, it does again have it's looking at your facial features. There's cameras pointed back at your eyes, right? So it can look at your pupils dilating. It can measure so much more data, which then, of course, it can use to train itself on.
Yep. That's why I call it hyperautomation. It's the exponential curve that is occurring during this age of automation. And so hyperautomation is feeding itself to rapidly innovate and develop itself over and over. It's like a recursive formula.
An Ouroboros.
Yeah, yeah, kind of. It's I don't know if it's consuming itself. Isn't that the snake that consumes itself?
Right. It's
I gotta brush up on my iconology.
It's kind of creative destruction in a sense, self-reinforcing feedback loop.
It certainly will destroy the jobs market that people are really burying their heads in the sand. And I touched upon this last time. So many economists, they see this new influx of jobs being created through this AI startup boom, but it's being balanced out by all the jobs being cut from big tech. So there's kind of a net neutral position. I don't think it's fully net neutral, but it really mitigates the major change. But as soon as this AI startup boom slows down and starts to dissolve, then we'll start seeing the major layoffs occur. And not just layoffs, but no longer posting for positions that were typically fulfilled by humans. So that's going to affect a lot going forward within the next 5 to 10 years, for sure, maybe sooner.
Yeah, it definitely seems, and that was something we touched upon when we spoke with you a couple weeks back, is that, there is this real risk of technological unemployment. And especially, I think, just to reiterate the point, the main thing that people need to understand here on this, and this, again, was something that you spoke about at length in your book, but in the prior technological or industrial revolutions, they unfolded over a relatively slow or long period of time, right? I mean, it took a very long time to develop railways, electricity, the steam engine. I mean, all the ripple effects that came from these major innovations. It took a relatively long time in order for them to ripple their way through society. Today, you're talking about ChatGPT reaching, 100 million users or 1 million users within just a week or 2 weeks?
I think it was 100 million.
100 million. I mean, just the uptake of technological innovations and applications at a rate we've never seen before at this scale. So, I mean, that's what makes it so disruptive compared to what we've seen in the past.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. And consider that all of those user queries and interactions help feed the development of the algorithm. So it's this feedback loop of hyperautomation. And another point there, the difference between the age of automation and previous industrial ages is that any new job is inherently automatable. So that never existed before. So you have like new types of programming jobs or databasing or vector databasing jobs are coming out. Well, those can be automated. So why would you go to school for 4 to 8 years to learn that. And by the time that you get out, that's a fully automated job. So that's something that really is not taken into consideration when my contemporaries do their forecasts. They're not considering these feedback loops of automation upon automation. And that's why my analysis looks a little more liberal than more conservative timelines, is because I take into account these feedback loops.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One thing that you discuss in your book when it comes to generative AI. So generative AI is the latest and greatest version of artificial intelligence stemming out of machine learning, deep learning, large language models, and then generative AI, is what's used by ChatGPT and, Google's Bard and et cetera, et cetera. But, a lot of people think of generative AI as being used for writing articles or writing poetry or even generating art, written books now, and can be used for writing books, you name it. But you talk about how generative AI can be used for many different applications, not even just
everything. Everything that we can create creatively can be generatively created. And I spoke in another interview, I don't think it was our interview, it was another one I gave, where I discussed the largest entertainment market or industry on earth is the gaming industry. I forget the actual value of it, but it's quite staggering. And I foresee in the very near future that a lot of the development will be done through generative AI in the next 12 to 16 months, basically reducing that market, jobs market by I don't even know, by a factor of 100. You could have 10 people using generative AI and LLMs to literally build an entire game that would take 500 employees years to make. So I'm using video games as an example because it's an industry that most people recognize, but there's nothing that says automotive design, aerospace, any sort of industrial design industry can also do the same thing. So you have a team of designers or scientists or engineers that you're paying millions and millions of dollars in labor to create specifically designed products. You could have generative AI and brute force machine learning punch through thousands or millions of permutations based on your description to the LLM, what you want, and what type of weight and airflow dynamics, and it can come up with the most optimal solution. And you could do that with one person. So these are the things coming down the pipeline that are inevitable, absolutely inevitable. And that's just based on how the free market works. You want to reduce your costs and increase your revenue. And the best way to do that is to mitigate your most expensive costs, which is traditionally labor, sometimes material, depending on your industry, but it's usually labor. And so if you reduce your labor and you can pump out more product or service, you'd be a fool not to do that. And so we're going to be seeing this more and more and more every 3 months for the foreseeable future. And so we really need to start addressing some of these concerns. And I think these policies that big tech, they had the hearing in DC. I've heard through my network and my connections that the recent meeting that they had at the White House
with Sam Altman at OpenAI,
yes,
is that the one you're referring to?
Okay. Yes, they had a closed door meeting as well. This was separate from the hearing. In the White House, they had this. And I have heard, and I had actually assumed this as well, so this was confirmation, that they were worried about the economics of releasing some of their more advanced models. They're actually slowing down the dissemination of some of these more advanced models simply because of the shock on the economy that would occur. And anybody can see this happening, except for the people running the government, apparently. So we have that occurring. We have AGI coming down the pipeline. What is the future going to look like for the average citizen or global citizen? I have no idea. Maybe they just want us to be in some metaverse and create currency there by selling your data somehow. So if you use your metaverse app for 8 hours a day, you give all your data away, they'll provide you with some sort of stipend. I don't know. I'm just postulating here, but somehow people need to generate income, and that won't be in the form of a UBI that's been discussed, because UBIs come from they're financially backed by the governments, who are financially backed by middle class tax structures. And if you have large chunks of your middle class that aren't working and paying into those programs, how are you going to turn around and provide UBIs to everyone else? You can't. So there's going to have to be a new type of economic system. How that's going to look, I have no idea. But that, again, will be within 5 to 10 years. These things happen so fast. Our lives are going to change more than we've ever seen.
Speaking of this idea of what the world is going to look like, when you have a lot of people that are basically out of work, perhaps they've lost their ability to even socially interact with people because they are so isolated. One person has brought up this idea of that we're kind of moving into a scenario similar to, and again, this is mythology here, as I mentioned the Ouroboros earlier, but the lotus tree, it's a plant where essentially the fruits and the flowers act as a narcotic, but it caused the inhabitants to sleep in this peaceful apathy. And after they ate the lotus, they would forget their home, their loved ones, and they would only want to stay with fellow lotus eaters. And so the idea is that, through this metaverse, everyone being connected to others through the metaverse, if you have this headset, or even if it's more integrated than that somehow, you can use your imagination, then in that case, you can basically create your own reality, and companies can just create, using generative AI, a perfect reality for you that you never want to leave, whether it's a gaming environment, whether it's, obviously your imagination is the limit and you never leave there. So that's the idea of the lotus eaters coming to the metaverse.
Yeah. I look at it, let's go long term and kind of fantasize about potentialities. That's certainly one of them. A lot of people will choose to live in a digitally created world where they can have sensory inputs, where you can touch and feel and smell and see. And I think there will be a portion of people who opt not to do that. And I think there will be groups of people who kind of embrace both, who don't want to live in a digital fantasy, but appreciate the augmentations of technology, and they may become explorers or something. I think I would opt for that. I would love to explore the universe. But who knows what the future is going to be. It's going to be incredible, and it's going to be much different than any other point in history. I don't think anybody argues that.
Well, and that's the thing. You're dealing with exponential trends here. And you can just look at historically, even population growth on an exponential curve, although perhaps we're in the phase of that plateauing. We'll have to see. But just in terms of the rate of technology, number of different technological trends particularly, but also societal trends on an exponential curve. So, things happen very fast. And, you talked about near-term disruption over the, coming months. We could definitely expect to see generative AI, these latest advancements, really disrupt the gaming industry just because of how easy it is to generate entire landscapes, entire gaming environments, just in moments using these supercomputers, which used to be done by a massive, massive team of developers. right? And this is true for the entertainment industry as well. When you
Yep.
think about all the computer CGI.
Script writers, CGI, you name it, everything. It's the most disruptive innovation that humans have ever created. And I would say created because we didn't create fire, we kind of harnessed it. So as a disruption, there's nothing like it. I mean, let me pitch my company for a second. We are not unlike thousands of other companies that are starting up and leveraging AI to disrupt larger industries. So we're trying to simplify data analytics for the Joe Schmo, the small business, or the individual analyst or individual investor, someone who doesn't have a PhD in analytics but wants to garner some insights that help them predict what they want. And so using AI now, we can do this relatively in a cost-effective way, whereas 10 years ago, it may have been possible, but the amount of capital required to do something like that is the reason why it was never done. And so you have all these little companies coming up with these disruptive and innovative AI solutions that completely demolish these large companies that have stood as foundations of whatever they were delivering, whatever service or product, and now AI is completely disrupting. This is why I think the AI boom is going to dissolve rather than pop, is because all of that IP will just get gobbled up. I mean, you'll still have some players that will hold steadfast and try to carve their own niche, but most entrepreneurs, there's a price for everything, Chris. There's a price for everything, as long as it's not causing significant harm, or the company that you're buying doesn't go against your moral judgment in some regard. You'll sell. Most people will sell. And then you can take that capital and do something else with it. So I think that's really what's going to happen. The AI disruptions are real. And I kind of not disagree, but I think that this exponential curve, I don't think it's going to plateau. I really don't. What will happen is we'll hit a straight line where we are no longer the innovators. We may have innovated our last thing after this AI boom, because AI will be the chief innovation engineer.
The last human invention, as it's sometimes referred to,
Yeah,
right?
well, I think that's a great way to describe it, because every new invention, unless you're an idiot, you'll leverage AI to help you. I mean, why would you shoot yourself in the foot and not use a powerful tool to help you invent something? And at some point, we have to acknowledge that AI is going to do 90 to 99% of that new invention. So we're about to hit a point in human civilization where something else is going to be the chief innovator. What is that going to look like? I have no idea. Read some science fiction, pretty much. It's going to get interesting, folks. It really, really is. And I think people are really having a hard time understanding the significance, that how lucky we are to be alive to witness this point in human history. Humans have been around for a very long time. Civilization, maybe 20,000 years or so. In that 20,000 years, most of that time, innovation was like somebody invented a new type of buckle. Somebody invented a new type of cloth. And that was those were the innovations, and those may have been divided by generations. So your children had pretty much the same life as their grandparents. There was very little difference. And only in the last 200 years, 300 years, has this started to exponentially grow. It's amazing.
Yeah. And, let's try to look forward in the future here, because I do think that there's some things that we can address on where the next stage of disruption is going to occur. Because, again, we've seen, like we discussed last time with you a couple of weeks ago, all these big tech companies that are racing forward and implementing these most advanced models of artificial intelligence. They're also laying off hundreds of thousands of workers collectively because they're becoming more efficient. And like you said, they're lowering their operating costs. The gaming industry is ripe for massive disruption. The entertainment industry is facing that right now. We've got the Writers Guild on strike, worried about what's going to happen here, and they don't want to get replaced. The next industry, there's a lot of industries that are going to be disrupted, nearly every one, but one that you also touch upon in your book is the healthcare industry. And I think this is one of the things that people may not realize. Generative AI, and I'm just reading basically right from your book, that generative AI can be used to develop new molecules, proteins, and drug treatments.
Yep. So I worked under contract with a quantum computing company that was leveraging AI to do just that. I'm friends with that executive still, and they're doing some incredible work in that field of developing generatively new types of materials, new types of molecular structures, stuff that humans, you just couldn't do. It would take centuries to kind of figure that out. And it can do this in no time.
And that's using quantum computers? They're using quantum computing to do that?
This specific company, this company is doing that. I guess I could name drop them. You might appreciate that. It's GenMat, GenMat. They received some significant financing trying to better position for the future, trying to create better materials and more environmentally friendly methods. So many of us have seen videos of surgeons using these very cool robotic platforms to perform very small, intricate surgeries. So it usually takes place of a surgeon looking through these glasses with two robotic arms, and they control it through levers and stuff. But what people don't consider is that all of that data is being assessed and saved into databases for later referencing. So an AI could take all of that visual movement data in three-dimensional space and start doing the same things that all these other generative platforms do and create its own types of surgeries that are more efficient and that they can be done without human intervention. And so that is going to happen. I have no doubts in my mind that surgeons will eventually be replaced. I don't know how long this will take. I think the greatest hurdle will be the comfort of the patient wanting to let a robot. But eventually, these robotic platforms will be able to assess the patient, diagnose the patient, and perform operations on a patient faster and better than any human could ever do. And so the healthcare, that's just the, one aspect of how the healthcare is ripe for being automated. Like you said, the chemical and research aspect is a huge part of it as well.
Yeah. So basically, if human surgeons are using robotic platforms, which is becoming more and more frequent for a wide range of surgeries, especially ones that are very meticulous, highly meticulous.
Yeah, think Hopkins or Boston or New York, big hospitals, institutions.
Right. So if they're using these robotic platforms, then they're also able to use that to train the AI to do the same thing or better.
Yeah, they're literally training to replace themselves.
Yeah, but there's a shortage of doctors right now. I mean, that's the thing with the baby boom generation, right? I mean, there's so many doctors that are retiring. So in a sense, this is kind of meeting a need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the healthcare industry needs some at least here in the U.S., needs some serious help.
Well, Mikhail, it's been a really fun conversation. And again, I think we've established the fact that artificial intelligence is going to continue to be highly disruptive to society and various industries in the near term. Like you said, gaming, entertainment. In the midterm, we should be looking probably at healthcare industry with the development of new molecules, proteins, and drug treatments using generative AI. And in the long term, there's really, everything's up in the
possible.
air. Yeah, everything's possible once we start to see artificial general intelligence, which I think you said, that's something that we could be seeing within, maybe a decade or two.
Perhaps less than that.
Okay, less than that. That's right. Yeah. So I think we're on the cusp of super intelligence when you just look at all the different tests that AI can now outperform humans on and reach the 100% threshold ceiling for. So, at this point, AI is definitely smarter than most humans and any one single person on the face of the earth when you just look at all the battery of tests that it can outperform us in. But there's going to be a lot of interesting things that are going to be happening. So I definitely look forward to speaking with you about these trends in the future. And as we close, would you mind telling our audience one more time the best way to follow more of your work and to find out more about your company?
Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's MICHAI. I'm probably the only Mackay on there. So just connect with me on LinkedIn, and then on there I have my business and links to my book and all the other interviews and media that I've done. I kind of use it as my central hub. My business website is Coeus, COEUS.institute. And that's our website. We're in the midst of redesigning our website because we just launched our new flagship product, which is Jira. We're trying to engineer a way to simplify predictive and comparative data analysis for regular people. Cris, I love coming on here. I love talking about this stuff. I feel like we could do it all day. So I look forward to doing it again.
Yeah, definitely. We'll have to have you back. And again, Mikhail Morin, data analyst, CEO of Coeus Institute, also the author of The Definitive Guide to the Age of Automation. Mikhail, it was a pleasure. We look forward to having you on in the future.
The Financial Sense News Hour is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a solicitation or offer to purchase or sell any securities. The investments, investment strategies, and investment philosophies discussed or presented on the News Hour each involve their own unique risk factors, which are not discussed on the show. Responses to listener inquiries are based on the personal opinions of the Financial Sense staff and do not take into account listener suitability, objectives, or risk tolerance. Financial Sense News Hour and its parent company shall not be liable for any financial losses that result from investing in any companies mentioned in Financial Sense or arising out of the use of any material on the News Hour. Be advised that you invest at your